Welcome back to the second session. Well done to make it through the first one, and now you're starting the second. That's good. Did anyone have any issues accessing anything online? In particular, the readings. That's the key. Remember, the PowerPoints, if you don't get access to those right away, that's not a big deal. They're always going to be there. Again, all this information is here. And the primary readings, the reading you had for today, is under the required reading, critical thinking, why it is important. I printed that out. You don't have to print it out, but you'll want to have access to it. If you've got an iPad, totally fine. You can bring computers in. You can have the documents there. That's totally fine. Ideally, you don't have a phone, but talk to me ahead of time that, I need my computer, I need my phone to read this, and I got to use it today just for that. That's fine, but otherwise, I prefer you not to have phones out. Just turn them off. I gave you an argument by analogy last time, did I not? About phones and texting in class, right? Did anyone come up with a rebuttal to that argument? Was it not? Or it was pretty good reasoning? You're content? That was good reasoning? Okay. Well, then remember that argument when you feel that desire. It's really an impulse. It's a craving. It's an addiction to get out the phone and start texting. You'll start to go through jitters and other kinds of withdrawal symptoms. But it's only an hour and, hour and 20? How long do we have? Hour and 15? I've forgotten. It's about an hour and 20. So you can hold off. All right. So, any questions from last time on the syllabus or anything else we discussed so far? Yes, sir.
This is kind of unrelated, but after you mentioned the thing about you not having a Porsche, I saw a Porsche right outside. Is that yours?
What color was it?
It was beige.
Beige?
Yeah.
First of all, who chooses a beige-colored car and then a beige Porsche? That is a terrible choice. Clearly not mine. My Porsche, in my mind, in my understanding, is red. That's all the details I have about it. But that is funny. You start to notice things. I noticed that when you hear words, like you'll learn a lot of new concepts here in this class. When you learn that word for the first time, you then start to see it everywhere, as if it just popped into existence. This is actually relevant to what we'll talk about today with background conceptual framework, with our presuppositions. Of course, that word, in my case, the word is moniker. I learned that years ago now. Moniker. Do anyone know what the word moniker means? I didn't either. And I was watching the show Friends with my wife, who was not my wife at the time. She is now. We're good. And one of the characters' name sounds very similar to this, right? Monica. And when one of the characters called out Monica, I thought, or at least when they said the word moniker, I thought they were referencing Monica's name, but just had that annoying accent with the R on the end of the word. You know how people sometimes do that? That's a good idea. And that's a pet. I don't care for that. And I got set into a rage, yelling at the TV. Her name is Monica. There's no R in Monica. What's wrong with you? And then my soon-to-be wife said, idiot, or something like that. I don't recall. It was years ago. The word is moniker. It means a nickname, you see. And the point of the story is, I have television rage, but also, I started seeing this word immediately afterwards. It would like pop up as if it had just came into existence. But of course, now I have it in my background expectations, my background framework, so to speak. I'm primed now to see it. That's fascinating. You do that when you buy a new car. When I first bought my Porsche, I'd wave at other Porsche drivers, like, whoa, loser. Of course, I'm joking. I ride my bicycle to work. It helps with road rage. I don't have it anymore. On my bicycle with my helmet, it looks silly. Okay, let's see. Let's get right into it. This is actually from the reading, but I have an earlier version of it. I didn't realize it was in this reading, so this works out well. Consider this. Ted and Emilio are walking down the street when a mugger confronts them and asks for all of their money. Just as Ted is about to hand over his cash, he stops and gives Emilio a $20 bill and says, "Oh, here's that 20 I owed you." Now here's my question to you. Did Ted pay back his debt? Why or why not? Normally I get into small groups and we do this, but we're not doing that. We'll just do a large group discussion. What is the question you should ask me before addressing the answer to that? Yeah.
Well, like, he said two, which is
Oh.
there's just two people that.
Oh, he said, here's that. Oh, that's right. Good. There's ambiguity there.
Yeah.
That would be weird to the mugger. Oh, I know you. I owe you money. Here you go. Yeah. No, the context doesn't make that clear, but I think we can interpret it. It's Emilio who's owed that money. Ted is about to hand over his cash. He gives Emilio. Yeah, and he owes, here's that 20 I owed you. Talking to Emilio. Yes. Good. So that's clarification that would be needed. Very good point. Hadn't thought of that. But what's an annoying question that philosophers tend to ask when they are asked anything at all? What do you think? Yes? Why? Well, we have that there. Did Ted pay back his debt? Well, what question should you be asking me?
What is meant by that?
Say again?
What is meant by that?
What is an unpaid debt? Or what does it mean to pay back your debt? That doesn't seem like a question that needs to be answered. Because why? Everyone knows what it means to pay back a debt, right? And yet, there's some confusion here. Did you have an answer or a response?
No, I asked that.
Okay. So given that, what does it mean to pay back a debt? Who can answer that? Yes?
To return something that you borrowed.
Very good. Simple. And does everyone agree that you should pay back your debts? Does anyone disagree with that?
College debt.
There you go. Student loans. Pay back your debts, except for the student loans. But yeah, if you get saddled with horrible debt, student loans, you don't get away from having to pay those, at least as it is now. You are saddled with that. Your wages will be garnished. You cannot file Chapter 11. You are screwed if you cannot pay back your student loan debt. Maybe they'll change that. We'll see. So there's an exception. Maybe that's a debt that you shouldn't have to pay back, or whatever. But of course, if you've borrowed something from someone, shouldn't you return it? Now, what's wrong with this? Why is this? We'll get into a fallacy called the fallacy of accident later on today. Our first fallacy, by the way. Error in reasoning. There's a mitigating circumstance here. Is it relevant? Does the context make Ted's actions here irrational? Or does it make him quite brilliant? Those are the things that you might want to consider. Has he paid his debt back? What if he had done this just a minute before the mugger showed? Would that have been relevant? It would have been funny. Amelia would be like, I can't believe you paid me that back right before we got mugged. How about that luck? Instead, what would you say if you were Emilio? That's a good way of trying to get a sense of what's going on here. If you're Emilio, would you agree that Ted has paid back his debt?
No.
What would you tell him? If you had to go to court over $20, let's say you're extremely litigious, and you said, I'm taking you to court, man, what would you tell the judge?
That it was the situation that he paid you back in, like count as like paying you back because the money was going to stay with me anyways.
Because the money was what?
The money, I wasn't going to keep the money, and he knew that.
Yeah. So it's not really technically. Notice when we say technically, there's the problem. Have you ever said that? Right? Did you, I don't know. I had an example, it just flew out my head. But when's the time when you said, yes, technically I'm I got a degree. What? What does that mean? You're applying for a very important job here. You're going to be a surgeon. Yes, technically I am a surgeon. If your surgeon tells you they're technically a surgeon, you should flee and find another doctor because there's a caveat there. There's mitigating circumstance, presumably, that's involved. So whenever we say the word, yeah, technically he paid it back, something's missing. And maybe there's the intention, there's the context, there's the understanding of what's going to happen to that money. It's clearly giving, it's fulfilling a basic physical definition of here's the money I borrowed from you. It's a different $20 bill probably, right? So that's different. I'm handing it to you. I've engaged in the practice of paying back a debt. Technically, all of that is accurate. But of course, in this particular situation, something is missing. The context tells us that's not obviously rational, nor is it obviously ethical. There are, again, connections between what is ethical and what is rational. This is something you've probably seen before. It's called the Linda problem. And it comes from the psychologist, I think he's called a behavioral psychologist / economist, Daniel Kahneman. I'll just give it to you. Linda, 31 years old, single, outspoken, and very bright. Majored in philosophy. It's because she's bright. That's obvious. As a student, she was deeply concerned with issues of discrimination and social justice, and also participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations. So that's your background. That's all you know about Linda. Given what you know about Linda, what is more likely the case? That Linda is a bank teller, or that Linda is a bank teller and active in the feminist movement? And here, as a class, we will be one large group. You may just shout out what you think is the case and why. Do that for the moment. Yes, sir.
I would think the first one, because the second one is the same, but then it just adds on another possibility, so that it's already going to be as likely just because she'd still be a bank teller.
So, for those, make sure we can hear that it's the first one you think because it's already included in the second. Interesting. I want to come back to that. Anyone disagree and think, no, it's the second? It's B. Go ahead.
Well, what if they're just doing that to make you think that it is the first one?
Who Kahneman and Tversky? Those are the people.
I think it's the second one.
You think it's the second one? Why?
Well, I've encountered the team psychology before, but I forgot what the reasoning was behind it.
Oh, so you've heard of this one
Yes,
before.
I have.
And you think it's this one.
Right.
Interesting. Ooh. Yes, and then yes?
Well, just basing my answer off what they give us, I would say it's the second one, because they both include bank teller, but being active in the feminist movement overlaps with dealing with like discrimination and social justice.
Uh-huh.
So
Good.
basically, just on like reasoning, what they tell us, I would say it's the second one.
Okay.
Well, there's nothing that says that she's working in a bank and the background information we're given, so why would we expect that it would be reasonable that she would be a bank teller?
Yeah, there's no information about bank tellers unless, you major in philosophy, and bank tellers, you fall back.
And actually, somebody that's active in social justice might be against working in a bank.
If I'm looking for, if I'm dealing with issues of social justice, although not all banks,
So it might be more likely that she was active in the feminist movement than a bank teller.
I see. But of course, these are the only two options.
Right.
Yeah, interesting, yes?
Well, I forgot that it didn't say that she was a bank teller, so my point's invalid.
Oh, okay. We'll get to the word invalid as a specific logical sense here, but in this case you're saying it's not relevant or something. Well, the answer, would you like the answer? What is the more likely, which is the more likely scenario? This is not it, because it is a conjunction. And a conjunction, two variables combined, are going to be less likely than only one of them. Being a bank teller is probabilistically, statistically, regardless of what's said here, more likely than being a bank teller and being a member of the feminist movement or being active in the feminist movement. After all, if she's B, she's already part of bank teller. And so, how many bank tellers are there? Two? What?
I thought it was option.
Say again?
I thought it was option.
No, how many bank tellers are there in the world? I'm sorry, I was confused. There's a lot. It's a huge number. B tells us she's already in that category of bank tellers. She just happens to be a feminist bank teller. That's less likely than that she's just a bank teller. Why do we get this wrong? I did too. When I first read it, it's like, yeah, obvious. Look, all that, definitely that. But that heuristic, that mental shortcut, is a bias. It has biased us, something called the representative bias. A bias is not always a negative thing, but when we're not aware of these biases acting upon us, they can be, and they can lead us to conclusions that do not follow, that are not very likely, probabilistically. The famous scientist Stephen Jay Gould, when he was confronted with this problem, says, I know intellectually the answer has to be A, but my homunculus is screaming at me, look at the description, it's got to be B. She's a feminist. Homunculus is a little person, little man inside his head. That little man in my head is telling me, look at this description. That description anchors our expectations. Our representative bias can override our capacity to reason critically and think analytically. You see other examples of it. What's more probable, that you'll see a UFO tomorrow, or that you'll see a UFO and run into a friend tomorrow? This is less likely than that because it's a conjunction. The more variables you add, the lower the probability of that thing happening. Specifically, if you're conjoining these two options, these two possibilities. You can add more to it and it gets even more unlikely. Go ahead.
So if it's a conjunction, wouldn't you raise the probability of part of the statement being correct and not necessarily the whole thing? So the whole thing would, yes, would probably be less correct, but a part of your statement would be more likely to be.
Perhaps. But notice, this is saying the and here, the conjunction is implying them both. So, and that's all that we're testing as far as probability. I think in the original, there's more than just the two options, bank teller or bank teller in the feminist movement. There were other options as well to make it a little bit more complex.
So in this sense, we're going perfectly accuracy.
Well, right. We're only looking at the two options. Is she just one here? Is she just a bank teller? Or is she also a bank teller active in the feminist movement? Regardless of how much that is represented up here, this is still much more likely to be the case. There's another example. What is it? An individual has been described by a neighbor as follows. Steve is very shy, withdrawn, invariably helpful, but with very little interest in people or in the world of reality. A meek and tidy soul, he has a need for order and structure and a passion for detail. Is Steve more likely a librarian or a farmer? What you need to do is go with what you know about Steve, just that little bit, and what you know about librarians and farmers. And maybe we're relying on heuristics, and maybe we're relying on stereotypes. What's the stereotypical librarian? In every single movie you've ever seen in your entire lives, it's a quiet, bespectacled
Old lady.
Yes. Now that's a stereotype, but maybe it's representative. In any case, there are more farmers than there are librarians. There are more farmers than there are male librarians. Those details are needed with respect to determining the probabilities.
To an or, does it become more likely that B is correct?
That she's a bank teller or active in the feminist movement. It depends if that or is an inclusive disjunct or an exclusive disjunct. Exclusive means it's not both. Inclusive means it can be one or the other or both. To confuse things better about that. So that matters. If it's inclusive, then no. This is still much more likely. If it's exclusive, then it's basically saying the same thing as this. Real quick, the distinction between exclusive and inclusive disjuncts in either or, right? If I'm looking for an applicant to teach, and I want to say all acceptable applicants must meet these minimum criteria. Either they have a PhD degree in the field, or they have relevant experience, or something like that. It would be weird if somebody came in and said, I've got a PhD and I've got relevant experience. And then you were like, sorry, I said one or the other, not both. That would be strange. That's we imply that as an inclusive disjunct. It's either one or the other, or both. The exclusive is either one or the other, but not both. And so here it's inclusive. So here the and the or would be basically similar with respect to what the intention is. But again, once we've assumed she's a bank teller, she's already in the larger category. And being just a bank teller is always going to be more likely the case than being a bank teller and something else. Anything else, the probabilities decrease.
So is the additional information about her being like doing protest stuff, is that like to deceive us or?
Yeah, it's a bit deceptive. And that's Stephen Jay Gould kind of harps on that. But it brings out the point that we make a lot of decisions based upon irrelevant factors. And not because we're being set up in such a way to do so, but because that's just how we work. We have all sorts of biases. William James calls them prejudices. And I want to be cautious. I don't equate a heuristic, which remember what a heuristic is? A mental shortcut. A rule of thumb, right, that you generally follow and generally works. I wouldn't want to equate heuristic with what William James here, famous philosopher and psychologist, with what he refers to as a prejudice. He says a great many people think they are thinking when they are merely rearranging their prejudices. That's a fantastic quotation. You think you're thinking, but you're just pushing around different biases, presuppositions, unargued for assumptions. You are prejudging without having yet argued. We talked about presuppositions last time. Much of this class is going to be devoted to pulling out those presuppositions and supporting them when necessary. What are some examples? What makes a good leader, for example? And I tell you, by way of the via negativa, it's not this. It's not this guy. It's not Warren G. Harding. Anyone in presidential historians? Why does this slide say number 1? Why are they're all number 1. Incorrect. I'll try and fix that later. Who has heard of Warren G. Harding? Yes?
Heard of him.
Yeah? Anything good?
No, I don't really. Name.
Just the name, yes. He was a president in the 1920s. He looks presidential. He's tall. I'm told he was handsome, I suppose. He sounded presidential. And he was taller. He was taller than his opponent. So there we go. But if you ask any presidential historian, he is always, almost every time, at the very bottom of the list of presidents. He was terrible. He was quite awful. Now, I'm not a presidential historian, but I do understand and recognize who are the experts in the history of our presidents. And so I would appeal to them unless otherwise given reasons to think otherwise. Unless given reasons to think otherwise, excuse me. But what is significant about this? About CEOs, heads of companies, about presidents? What features of presidents, let's just stick with that for a moment, are common but logically irrelevant to their capacity to lead? Yes, and then yes.
Confidence?
Confidence? He has confidence. Look at him. That's irrelevant? I don't. Maybe that is relevant. Why would confidence not be relevant with respect to your ability to lead?
Because if you can't back it with like actual knowledge and like understanding,
Uh-huh.
it's just kind of like you in your own world.
Well, that would be, I guess, the distinction between confidence and arrogance.
Yeah.
So, arrogance, cockiness, that's not good. Oftentimes, people who are arrogant are that way because they're using that as a front for lack of capacity or something like that. But confidence is, that's not a bad thing. You go into an exam, confidence makes a difference. If I rely upon heuristics and tell you, people in your demographic typically don't do well on these tests. Here you go. That's a shitty move by the teacher. that will play upon stereotypes, and that does affect your confidence, and that does negatively affect your ability to do well on it. That's a stereotype, and that engages in what's called stereotype threat. Even though that stereotype might not directly apply to you as an individual, your awareness that there is the stereotype about women in science, which is still a stereotype, believe it or not, that can affect you negatively in how you perform. And likewise, if I tell you, you know what, people with your background do really well on these tests, that also can aid in your confidence and make a difference. So that's a really interesting one. I think more needs to be said about that. And we'll look at the distinctions between the proper use of emotion and the negative uses of emotion, and where that might benefit us with respect to argumentation. But confidence and arrogance seem to be a bit different. What was the other hand? I'm sorry. Yes?
I feel like they tend to be more masculine, they tend to be taller as well.
Not only more masculine, but absolutely male. All of them. All of them. There's another feature. Yes?
Being white.
They've been tall, male, white, Protestant, rich. And the same is the case for CEOs of companies. Yes?
I feel like people associate good leaders as them being older. Like, I mean, look at our presidential candidates last year.
Wow, yes. There are exceptions. Obama was quite young. Let's see. Kennedy was the young. And Kennedy was Catholic. Oh, coincidentally, there he is. And he was also very... I'm not even going to ask you. You know the answer. You know the answer to this question. Who won this debate? This is Nixon. That's Kennedy. Who won the debate? Just by looking at that picture. Kennedy won. Kicked his ass. Unless you listened to the debate. Then you would think this guy won. The guy with the 5 o'clock shadow, sweating profusely, jacket all rumpled, wouldn't put on the base, I think it's called, to help with the lighting. This is the first televised debate, so he didn't know about all that. Kennedy seemed to know all about it. He looks like he's modeling for the Men's Warehouse, with his suit and tie there, teeth shiny as can be. Nixon refused. He said, and I quote, "I'm not putting that on. I'm not putting that base on my face. Makeup's for fags." End quote. He said the darndest things, and we have most of it on tape, if you want. But he won the debate because he had the better arguments. In this particular case, that doesn't mean he was a better president than Kennedy. That's a different argument, different issue. The issue here is this was simulcast. Kennedy appeared better, and therefore people who watched it thought he won. People who listened didn't have all those representative biases swirling around through which they saw the candidates. They just heard the arguments. Did you have a question?
It's on the leadership.
Uh-huh.
I think it's someone who provides an environment for people to grow and thrive on their own. Someone that inspires instead of commands.
It inspires instead of what?
Commands.
Commands. Yeah, so those are features that seem relevant logically to one's capacity to lead a company, lead a nation, and so forth. It's not obvious that we rely upon those, especially with our first reactions. We oftentimes just go with, look at this person, more attractive. Look at this person, they're taller. And we're not necessarily thinking it consciously. These are oftentimes heuristics that undergird what we do. Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, like, this relates to, like, the gender thing of being more emotional.
Uh-huh.
And
Yes.
how some people say that women cannot be good leaders because they have hot flashes and are like more emotional than men are.
Yes. And one would like to say, well, that's a stereotype from the past. If by past we mean 2016, which is the past, but it's pretty recent. We don't want a woman who's overly emotional. Could be that time of the month, someone actually said, who was in the public sphere, and she can and she has access to the button, that is to say, nuclear bombs. We don't want somebody too emotional or unstable. I'm not going to remind you who she was competing against. But you see, the problem is we assume, and this philosophy has a lot of responsibility here. Going back to Plato, and we'll talk more about this later with emotion versus reason, there's the presumption that reason is on one side and emotion on the other, and you cannot mix the two. If somebody is being emotional, automatically it's negative. We want somebody who's logical, like Spock, as we mentioned last time, or Gottlieb Frege, the Vulcan. Did I tell that joke last time? Didn't land then either. Gottlieb Frege is a German logician from the turn of the century. I pretend he's like a Vulcan. But you cannot divide those two, as we're going to see. You're not a human being if you're not emotional. And you're in fact not going to be rational if there's no emotion behind your decisions. What matters is how that emotion is utilized. What matters is how that emotion is appealed to. Is it fallaciously appealed to, like in scare tactics, for example? Or do the emotions motivate? Note the etymology, emotion, motivation. Those are connected. It's not merely coincidental. If I'm not motivated to think about something, then it doesn't matter how rational or logical I am, I'm not going to ponder it. And in fact, we can make terrible decisions, logically, if our emotional elements are not in line. And so Plato was wrong. Nietzsche was wrong. The philosophers throughout history were wrong to divide logic and reason from emotion. And we'll see that with respect to artificial intelligence to today. People trying to devise artificial intelligent machines, but doing so without including emotionality, are going to fail. And we'll see why that might be later on. Okay, so, yes, handsomeness, height, irrelevant factors to whether one can lead. The whiteness of your skin, irrelevant. The maleness of your character, or of your biology, or whatever it might be, also seemingly irrelevant. Now, you might say, well, wait a minute, that's not irrelevant. People look up to tall people. People look up to men with broad shoulders. That was a stereotype also used in the previous elections. We want somebody with broad shoulders. Who has broad shoulders? Men who wear coats with pads to make their arms seem broader than they perhaps are. It may be the case that there are stereotypes that women shouldn't lead. That's not the same thing as saying they cannot logically lead. It's psychologically relevant, and that's why politicians appeal to these emotional triggers, but it's not logically connected to whether or not one could be a good leader. Yeah?
I was just going to ask, it doesn't look like Kennedy has padded shoulders, whereas Nixon definitely.
Oh, I don't know, actually. You can tell he does?
Yeah, so when you wear pads, it's when you don't have pads, it's more of like a refined curve.
Oh.
Whereas if you have pads, it's more of a sharp line.
Wow. I didn't know that. I haven't worn a suit and tie since that last funeral I went to. Many, many years ago. That's sad. I don't know why you guys laughed at that. Funerals. And again, what the hell? No, it's okay. Okay, let's, in the interest of time. So we're be concerned of how our heuristics drive us, how heuristics can turn into prejudices, how prejudices can turn into harmful stereotypes, which we'll return to later on. This is a concern. A critical thinker is aware of their own thinking, is aware of why they thought the way that they did. But they're also getting deeper into what might be the cause of something, such as these cropped circles. These aren't as prevalent anymore, but boy, they fascinated me years ago, and they were common. There's some more of them. Look how fascinating that is. These are fields of crops, and these designs seem to be carved out in some mathematical precision that seems impossible to have created unless what? What's a hypothesis for the cause of these crop circles, as they were called? Who wants to?
Aliens.
What's that?
Aliens.
Aliens, yes. And you say that because?
Because it's just a big stereotype of like strange occurrences being UFO related, like bees.
How would the UFOs have done it? Yes?
Is the question how they created it?
What is the explanation? It will make it general. What's the explanation for those? How can we explain them? And aliens is one explanation. Or, well, wait a minute. Did we say UFOs or aliens?
Why or how?
Either one. And maybe you get the same. Maybe you get the why when you get the how, but not necessarily.
I don't know. I think they just was it a long time ago? I think they just like put a stick in the middle, rope around it, and then.
Oh, you're familiar with this? Yeah. Yes. That's one way it could have happened.
Around.
And walk around. Well, although it's impressive. I mean, look at these things. That's really impressive how they did that. I think aliens did that. I don't think the pyramids could, and this is not me actually talking here, so I should be doing this in quotes the whole time. I think the pyramids were built by ancient aliens. Notice the word ancient aliens, that's the name of a show on the History Channel. They throw the word ancient in there to make it seem acceptable to be on the History Channel. And they have people come out there and talk and make really involved, detailed arguments. But rarely do they then ask the next question, what would have to be the case if aliens, ancient or otherwise, were responsible for building these pyramids, were responsible for making these crop circles? What else would have to be the case? Once you've asked that, you have potentially started a path at least toward undermining the conspiracy theorists' view. Because conspiracy theories, which we'll talk about at the end of the semester, are oftentimes seen as self-sealing webs of beliefs that are consistent internally. But once you ask, if all of what you're saying is true, what else would have to be true? Don't you see that if this is true, these other things would have to be true? If these other things aren't true, these other things which are ridiculous, absurd, contradictory, cannot be the case. You yourself wouldn't accept. Therefore, it must be the case that your first assumption, the conspiracy theory, the UFO, whatever, isn't the case. And what would have to be the case if these were aliens? I shouldn't call them UFOs. That's actually just means what? Unidentified flying object. That's not an alien necessarily. It is.
Anything that's not identified.
We don't know is what that is. That's all it means. I think the military has recently released a tranche, I think they call it, of documents about Area 51, or rather about military personnel who have seen, experienced UFOs, or now they're called unidentified aerial phenomena, UAPs. I don't know if that gives them more gravitas than UFOs. I didn't say I saw some space saucer, but I did see something that's behaving in a way that we don't have technology to explain. And there's a lot. And it's interesting. It's surprising. These are professionals. These are credible individuals whose job it is to be able to read radar and other instruments to see what ships, what planes, what machinery might be out there, what threats there might be. But what you need to ask is, what would have to be the case if what you're saying is true? And I mention conspiracy theories because UFOs, there's the conspiracy that the United States government, the military, already has aliens, and we've been hiding it for decades. And that this is evidence of alien interaction, except that we have evidence of our alternative hypothesis, and these guys who say, no, here's how we did it. We used this stick, it's something called a plinth, which I'd never heard of before. It's a sculpting term. And you walk around in circles and you flatten the grass. And they were mathematicians. They had really impressive ways of doing this. And when they came out years later, it took them, imagine the patience of these people, watching the world go crazy about UFOs and aliens. And all along, they know what's going on. They finally come out and say, hey, everyone, we did it. Here's how we did it. And what did the ufologists do? What did they say? Yes?
That this is a government cover-up.
They did not believe the people who did the action. Just like Houdini, when he told his friend, Robert Louis Stevenson, I'm not a magician. This isn't real. Here's how I do this trick. Here's how I talk to the dead. I'll explain it to you in detail. And Stevenson, his friend of Houdini, said, I don't believe you. What do you mean you don't believe me? I think you're really talking to the dead. How can you say I'm telling you I'm not? I'm telling you how I've done it. People still believe. Even when they're given counter evidence. We might call that irrationality. We'll define that term in more detail in a bit. I missed your hand earlier, I'm afraid. Go ahead.
Do you know the origins of why Area 51 is known to be like the alien, like where UFOs are?
Say again? What?
Do you know why Area 51 is known to be like where UFOs are?
Like that?
Yeah.
It was a military base that's highly secretive?
Yeah, so Skunk Works apparently supposedly works out of there. They're the ones that did the SR-71 Blackbird.
The helicopter or the
The stealth bomber.
I thought it was a helicopter. Oh, yeah.
No, they do helicopters too.
Okay.
But, they used to, during the Cold War, they would bring Soviet planes that were downed or captured, and they would re-engineer them at that facility. But they didn't want spies or
Makes
information
sense.
that this was happening being leaked to the Soviet Union. So it just kind of was this base that was shrouded in so much secrecy that
I see.
kind of rumors just kind of spread.
Very good. We'll return to conspiracy theories later at the end of the semester. But notice what you provided us with, an alternative hypothesis.
And I can provide a source if you want.
Save that for, because I do want to see that. There are alternative hypotheses. This is not to say, because it's logically possible, a phrase we'll define later, that aliens visited us, and we have, in fact, ships of them. That's logically possible. But what other things would have to be true for that to be the case? Not just life, but intelligent life. What are the chances of that? If they're not terrestrial, if they're extraterrestrial, and by the way, to look for extraterrestrial life is not that strange. Carl Sagan famously started SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Life, Intelligence, 40 years ago. But when they're looking for life, presumably they're looking for Earths, planets that are like Earth, that might have water, that might have an atmosphere, that might be the similar distance to its sun as we are to ours. We know that would be the Goldilocks, so to speak, perfect position for there to be the possibility of life. And we found a lot of those planets. It's just that they're way far away, on the order of light years away. And what's a light year?
It's the amount of space you can travel in a light, or the amount of time, distance that light can travel in a year.
Yes. And that doesn't sound like much until you realize light travels at 186,000 miles per second. How many seconds are there in a year? Figure that out. Multiply that by 186,000. That's how many miles a light year is. Can we travel the speed of light? We can't. Does that mean that no one can in the universe? Not necessarily. But notice that would have to be the case. There would have to be intelligent life that has achieved light speed. We don't even have that in, what does Star Trek have? Warp speed?
Yeah.
Or is it, and then in Spaceballs it was ludicrous speed, and then they went plaid. Spaceballs. Movie. Mel Brooks. Great movie. If you haven't seen Spaceballs, you have a flawed character, is what that means. Anyway, so my point is there are alternative hypotheses, and accepting the conspiracy theory in this case, and it's complex. I'm spending more time on it than I intended to here. I'm sorry. I get really exercised about it for some reason. There are actual conspiracies. The government has spied on citizens. That's true. There have been situations in which there were plots by certain groups. These things have been unearthed, but they've been unearthed by whistleblowers. They've been unearthed by investigative journalists, not by conspiracy theorists. But more on that later. So you would ask the conspiracy theorists, what would have to be true if what you're saying here is true? And furthermore, are there alternative explanations? Could a weather balloon be confused for a UFO? Yes. By the way, everyone has a cell phone now. And some of the cell phones now have 3 cameras. And the cameras are incredible, way better than most cameras. And how many cell phones are out there? How many iPhones in the world?
At least 4.
A lot.
Somewhere between 4, a lot, and billions. I don't know the number. I'm going to say 1 billion. Just give or take. Give or take a few 100,000. Everyone has access to, if they see something strange, let's videotape that. Why do we not have clearer images of UFOs? That's something that should be concerning to us. And when we do have them, do we not have alternative explanations? When I saw this a couple of years ago, that freaked me out. I didn't know what that was. And I have to tell you, yes, it turns out it was this. I have to tell you, my immediate thought, because of my heuristics, my representative biases, was aliens. It went through my head quickly. Then the second thought was, oh my God, a plane just blew up. And then another thought was, oh, it's a rocket missile. All that went very quickly. And then somebody reminded me, oh no, Elon Musk. Now that sounds strange. Musk? Yeah. He's a potent odor, that man. Musk is a very potent smell. The alternative hypothesis is that it was a spaceship. Now, I mentioned the credibility of pilots, of Navy officers. Why do I mention that? Well, this tranche of information that's come out about UFO sightings or unidentified aerial phenomena, it's hard to discount because we say, well, these people, they're professionals. Yes. But they're people, and what do we know about people? They lie. Now, that's not very charitable, but it's an alternative hypothesis. They're lying. That's one hypothesis in contrast to alien life forms. I don't like that one, though. What's another one? They're human, therefore they are fallible, which means they're prone to make mistakes. Are humans prone to make errors? Are Navy and Air Force pilots humans? Yes, they are. They may be making mistakes. And maybe even a better one, they're relying on equipment in most cases. And if they're lying just on their eyes, again, the weather balloon could look much like that. And look at that, the image is quite blurry. Have you ever had a piece of computer technology glitch on you? So computers can glitch, machinery can glitch. We'll look at a reading from, what is it? Skipping ahead. Kaylin O'Connor and James Weatherall in The Misinformation Age, How False Beliefs Spread. They'll give an example of technology that was calibrated in the wrong way, but people over-relied upon that. It's possible that the machinery is just making mistakes, is glitching. Given that actuality, that it does happen, maybe that's a better explanation than that there are actual aliens having visited. For example, those are some things to think about when confronted by initially implausible or conspiratorial-sounding claims. It doesn't mean the conspiracy theorist is wrong. It doesn't mean those who say these are aliens, or most of the pilots, by the way, are just saying, we don't know what the hell it is. We can't explain it. And that's kind of scary, too, because it could be, other rogue nations with technology that we don't yet get or understand.
Is it true that the government created the term conspiracy theory to undermine people that have, actual, testaments?
That itself sounds like a conspiracy theory, doesn't it? That's what they want you to think. Who's they? Them. No. Conspiracies have been around. It depends on what government you're talking about, because there have been conspiracies well before the origin of the United States. In fact, the United States itself, many argue, is devised upon a significant amount of conspiratorial thinking, which I'll come back to when we get to conspiracy theories. But the short answer to that is I don't think so, because the U.S. has only been around for about 250 years, and conspiracies have been around well before that, and the term variations of it, I think, has too. Although the etymology of that term would be interesting to look into. All right, let's get into the reading for today. I can't find any pictures. I don't know what they look like. I guess these two. You've got to be kidding. How jokes can help you think. We've already looked at this a little bit, this chapter, what the importance of critical thinking, or why critical thinking is important. Sort of introducing the topic, they mention this guy, John Morrell, who I do have an image of. I think single-handedly has made the philosophy of humor a relevant and meaningful subdiscipline within philosophy, starting back in the late 1970s, writing about how humor is philosophically interesting. Philosophers since Plato have talked about humor and laughter, but it's never become its own subfield. Morrell says this: humor today goes hand in hand with our rationality. And not just rationality in the sense of cognitive sophistication, but also in the sense of a rational attitude toward the world. Part of this attitude is viewing things critically. And people with a well-developed sense of humor naturally look at things critically because they are looking for incongruity. We'll define critical thinking in a moment, but what does incongruity mean?
Like inconsistency?
It could mean that. It's a broad term, but yes, things that are inconsistent, which means what?
Like, I don't know, you're expecting one thing to act like another and it doesn't.
That's right. Unmet expectations, we get you. Something that's dissonant, right? And dissonance, things, in music, we don't like dissonance in most cases. We want harmony. We want balance so that we're comfortable. Dissonance is uncomfortable. But learning and thinking critically, especially about your own belief systems, that's not comfortable, especially when you realize, oh shit, I might be mistaken. I might be mistaken about something very important to me that I take to be essential to my very being, to my identity. Those kinds of beliefs that are part of our web of beliefs, I like to call it a WOB, after the philosopher W.V. Quine, Willard Van Orman Quine, an American logician, 20th century. Web of beliefs. We don't like to have those central beliefs questioned. But if we're critical thinkers, that's one of the things that we have to do. And one of the things ethically and logically we can look at is where our beliefs, our desires, our values, our virtues, our morals may turn out to be one thing and our actions another. When our actions are incongruous with our morals, with our ideals, with our theories, probably something has gone amiss. And humor, especially if you look at contemporary humor, political humor, whatever's on the Comedy Central channel nowadays, that's political humor, does that. It points out errors. It points out flaws. It critically analyzes. Jon Stewart did this very well. It critically analyzes the the proclaimed values and ideals and morals, and then the inconsistent action by those same people who live by and proclaim to have those values. Stewart was certainly a left-leaning person, but he would also do that with politicians who were liberal. So anyway, there's a connection to be made between this capacity to think logically, critically, analytically, and our sort of humorous attitude, which I equate with a philosophical attitude. In the Intro to Philosophy class, I expand on that comparison in a lot more detail. I want to start with, or continue with a question here. The answer to it is not hard, but it's significant. So a treasure hunter is going to explore a cave up on a hill near a beach. He suspected there might be many paths inside the cave, so he was afraid he might get lost. Obviously, he did not have a map of the cave. All he had with him were some common items, such as a flashlight and a bag. What could he do to make sure he did not get lost trying to get out of the cave later? Just raise your hand. What would you do?
Find a stick and just drag it behind me.
That's not a bad idea, yeah. That's fine, yes?
Not go in the cave and go get some string and go back.
Get some string? Yes. That's an interesting one. I can think of a couple of stories related to that.
To leave a couple of things so you know where you came from while you're walking around.
Yes.
You pick them up.
Yes. With the bag, you can use the sand and make the path. All of these are variations of the same solution, and they're all correct. How is it that you came to that? You've never heard this particular question before, but you're able to critically analyze this particular problem because you've got what the cognitive scientist Daniel Willingham calls deep structural knowledge. And you're able to critically apply that deep structural knowledge to novel experiences, novel problems. This problem isn't really novel, it's the fairy tale. What? What fairy tale is this from? Hansel and Gretel. What was the one you said?
The Greek myth about the Minotaur and the maze.
That's another one. And Ariadne with her thread, I think, is a related one. But yes, these are part of our culture, so much so that they're infused and found in movies. I was watching The Shining the other day. They're in a labyrinth. Ooh, movie freaks me out still. But that's part of our culture. It's so deeply embedded that you immediately see it. And you're able to logically connect to different problems, even though the original Hansel and Gretel story is, of course, different than this one. If you ask the same question of, say, students from Asia, from China in particular, they can figure out a version of it, but it takes them a lot longer because they do not have that fairy tale in their culture that is infused in all aspects of their culture, whether they're aware of it or not. There's a parallel example in which a Chinese fairy tale is used as the grounding of this, but Americans do, for example, quite poorly. And yet the Chinese students are immediately able to figure it out because it's part of their deeply ingrained, deep structural knowledge. You cannot think critically if you're not able to get to that deep structural knowledge such that you can apply what you know in this, let's say, word problem in math. And the formula, let's say, is the same formula that you would use in this other problem. It's just that the surface structures are different. A critical thinker is able to recognize where the surface structure doesn't matter. Are you talking about rows in a garden, or are you talking about a marching band? It doesn't matter, just to give you a typical example. A critical thinker is able to recognize the deep structural formulaic problem, or formula as a means of solving it, or appealing, or applying that formula in novel ways. It's not just rote memorization. Memorization is very important. But to critically analyze something is to be able to use what you know in novel situations that require some domain knowledge, which I'll describe in a moment. Let me get a couple of hands. I've forgotten where they are. Yes.
I was just going to ask, I heard you mention the name Ariadne, and I remember from Inception, the movie, when Leonardo DiCaprio has them write the little maze.
That's right.
On the paper.
There's another example. Now, it doesn't matter how many fairy tales you've absorbed in your life, the movie Inception will not make sense until you've seen it. I don't know. I've seen it a lot. It's really interesting, but I don't know what in the world is happening.
Have you seen Tenet?
Say again?
Have you seen Tenet?
I think so. Is that another Leonardo DiCaprio?
Yeah.
I've forgotten what it is. So.
It's like time inversion.
Oh, then no, I haven't seen
It
that
just
one.
came out this during COVID.
Then I have not seen it. Okay, what is critical thinking? Let's ask the Socratic question. Socrates loved to ask the what is it question. And he's asking for the definition, the necessary, sufficient conditions. Two terms we'll return to later on. He was asked, Socrates was, what is virtue and can virtue be taught? Well, can ethics be taught? It's a parallel kind of question. The reason I asked this question is Daniel Willingham, I referenced a moment ago. He wrote a paper around 2008. He's, again, a cognitive psychologist. And the paper was, why is critical thinking so hard to teach? And he wrote that around at the height of this No Child Left Behind movement. I don't know if you remember that, or if that it does affect you because it's what pushed standardized testing everywhere. Standardized testing. Notice a standardized test that relies upon something like this that is cultural in many respects versus something that might be a skill that can transfer from one area to the next. There's a couple of ways of looking at this. Is critical thinking, and it's something that term is thrown around everywhere, all the time, and has been for the past 20 years or more. I prefer inductive logic or informal logic, because that's really what this class is, but we call it critical thinking, so I'm going to go with that. And I'm going to give what I think is a decent understanding of this term. Willingham is doubtful about the efficacy of critical thinking, that it can be taught, that it is something that is a skill that can carry over from one area to the other. Can I teach critical thinking in philosophy? And if I teach you that, will that skill of critical thinking then apply to another class like history or biology? Does somebody able to critically think in biology able to transfer that skill to critically thinking about poetry, for example? I use the analogy of sports. Is critical thinking like athleticism, or is it a specific skill? Somebody who's an amazing athlete might be able to play baseball professionally and basketball, like Michael Jordan did. Or baseball and football, like Bo Jackson did. And that's all I can think of. Is there anyone else who does more than one sport professionally? But if I'm a very good athlete, if I have athleticism, I can probably go from one sport to another. But if I'm really good at golf, does that mean I'm going to be good at any other sport? I'm just kidding. Golf's not a sport. You laugh, but I'm deadly serious. If you can ride a cart and drink beer during the activity, you are not engaged in a sport. End of story.
What about rugby?
You actually can drink during that. In fact, in college, we had a rugby team, and they had a keg during their matches, which was fantastic.
You play rugby?
I did not. I played soccer. I didn't understand rugby. I didn't know what the hell they were doing in the scrum. If you don't know what a scrum is, look it up.
You know about like cricket and how like that
Yeah.
goes?
I don't know how cricket goes, but I know it's a sport.
It's like 3 days.
Yeah. It's grueling. And that one's also, I don't understand it, but that doesn't mean it's not a sport. I've played golf. It's a tough game. But we'll come back to that more with definitions. That's actually going to become relevant. Yeah.
Well, to answer your question, I wouldn't say either athleticism or being a critical thinker in one topic can be easily transferred. Just because, say, like for sport-wise, not every like sport requires the same muscle groups that are being used, or muscle memory, or coordination. Same with topics, like in school. Say you're really good in history, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be really good in math.
Very good. Now, I think, and that's good. We'll talk about arguments by analogy, which is the most common form of argument that we engage in. And so you did a good job, I think, already analyzing the comparisons and looking at it more deeply. And there's something to be said for if somebody's good at American football, they'll probably be decent at rugby, right? And the parallel might be, if I'm good at thinking logically about physics, I'll probably be good at thinking logically about mathematics. But that doesn't mean I'm going to be an amazing poet, right? Maybe those are two separate domains. And therefore, what would be a standardized test in critically thinking generally? That's not obvious. Yeah.
Gosh, I don't know if it's relevant. And I don't mean to like suck up to your class or anything, but critical thinking and philosophy seems like one of the areas of critical thinking that would be the most transferable across disciplines, because philosophy kind of is inherently above like theontic disciplines.
Above, yes. I love that. There's a meme that demonstrates this. It demonstrates as if it makes it true because it's in a meme. It's that guy with like 10 leashes of dogs. He's walking the dog, and there's mathematics, history, sociology. They're all the dogs, by the way. All the disciplines. And then the guy holding the leash, philosophy. Enough said, I think, right? My argument is made. It is true, a lot of the disciplines that exist, sociology, psychology is the philosophy of mind. These disciplines don't exist were it not for philosophy. There were mathematicians before philosophers. In fact, the earliest philosophers were mathematicians. So there's already an undercurrent of philosophical thinking that could apply everywhere. And in fact, I want to make that case that we can, I'm skipping through here in the interest of time, and these slides again are all available to you. I can, in this class, engage you with what I'll call critical thinking, inductive logic, informal logic, that will benefit you not just in philosophy, because this is a philosophy class, but you can actually expand on your argument and say, because everything can be seen through a philosophical lens, which is almost trivially true, so we want to say more what that means. Any issue can be analyzed through the tools of logic. And logic is the science of argumentation. And in what other disciplines do you construct and evaluate arguments?
Like all of them.
All of them, right? And this is true for your jobs as well, for your employment in the future. What is a critical thinker? Somebody, who can do these things. Now, Willingham points out, I can't think critically just in general. I have to have some content. I can't think critically about World War I and the causes of World War I if I know no historical facts related to it. Critical thinking is being able to take the historical facts and be able to analyze them, be able to see from multiple perspectives. Why is it that England played the role that they did in World War I? And what role did the Italians have? What was the connection between the two, for example? most importantly and most difficultly is being open to seeking evidence that may, or recognizing evidence or argument, premises, data, facts that may go against your own cherished opinion. To critically analyze is not just to critique others. That's easy to do. We're naturally inclined to do that. But applying that analysis to our own position is much more difficult. And of course, giving reasons for things. This seems almost trivially true as well. Of course, to think critically is to give reasons for why you think the way that you do. But if you listen to how people speak, very rarely are reasons offered for what they think. Instead, you oftentimes get a repetition of an opinion. Here's what I think is true. And then they say the same thing, but with synonyms, but with different words. And when you've done that, you've gone in a circle. You haven't actually given a justification, a reason. You haven't held up your opinion. And when you hold up your opinion with premises, with data, with facts, with arguments, a premise, you've turned that opinion into a conclusion. And when you turn an opinion, what you think is true, into a conclusion, you have constructed an argument. That, by the way, is what an argument is. Giving reasons for a particular belief, in the most general sense. And the tools that we'll learn, deduction, induction, and there's a whole tree of things, of different kinds of deductive arguments, and we're going to focus more on inductive arguments. These are kinds of arguments that you can utilize and will and do already in every other discipline. The deep domain structural knowledge of this class is the essence of argumentation, of logic. And that applies to anywhere you have argumentation involved. That doesn't mean you're going to be a great biologist. You still have to know facts, details about biology. We're looking at how to make the logical inferences from those facts. That's the key for this class. And there are some objective ways of doing that. So what is critical thinking? Well, it's to be rational or reasonable. And as caps and caps note, those terms are often synonymous. But to do a little bit of conceptual analysis, not too much here, I want to question that. In fact, I'm saying no, pretty straightforwardly, they're not always the same. It's not always the case that when I'm being rational, I'm at the same time being reasonable, although they typically are used synonymously. Does anyone have an example of where one is being rational, but it's not very reasonable? It's hard to kind of get a sense of that. Yeah? Thanos from
the MCU.
Oh, that's a great example, where he kills everyone to...
Half of like...
That's a brilliant example. You'll have to explain the show. I've watched that with my kids recently.
So...
Thanos comes from the Greek meaning death.
When we
Thanatos.
explain the MCU?
No,
Okay.
just that part.
That's pretty big.
He makes a utilitarian argument.
Yeah.
That is, we want to save life. But the only way to save life, he thinks, is to
get rid of half of it. Because he came from a planet where they grew and grew and grew and then basically collapsed because there was nowhere left to go.
Yeah.
And they overextended.
Yeah.
So his theory is that if you get rid of half of all life, you have an abundance of resources.
That's right.
So you won't have famine, illness, war, and collapse.
Yes, and if we have overpopulation, that's what's causing a lot of the problems, presuming that's the issue. You could be wrong about that.
Yeah.
And pretty big mistake if you go that route. It turns out overpopulation wasn't the problem. My bad. Half of all life has been killed. It's too late. But it seems that it could be turned into a deductive, rational proof. If overpopulation is the problem, all of these problems are a result of overpopulation, what do? Reduce the population. How do we do that? And quickly. That seems to be a rational thing to do, but not necessarily reasonable. I have my own example. Attempt to construct an argument that's purely deductive, that you love your spouse. Wouldn't that be weird? I mean, writing a poem would be great, but then give your wife a deductive hypothetical syllogism. Here's why I love you. Let me count the premises. It's kind of strange. Yes?
There's much more peaceful ways of population control that we do.
Oh, right, there are alternative ways, yes.
And like, I think China or Japan, they limit the amount of
Yes.
kids you can have.
Yes, that has its own negative outcomes. In fact, they choose, in fact, they favor which gender too. So there's that extra concern. But you're right, there are certainly alternatives, but that may be rational still, but also more reasonable. I'm not going to talk about Zeno's paradoxes here. They're basically, one of the paradoxes is that motion doesn't happen. It's an illusion. Logically, it's hard to discount that rational argument, but it's not reasonable to live by it. Motion's impossible. I'm just going to lie down. Attempting to create artificial intelligence without emotion, that's actually not going to be reasonable. It sounds rational, but until we recognize, we've already touched on this, that emotion plays a pretty big role in our reasoning capacity. We get out at 12:30, right?
Yes.
Okay. Another example with Buridan's ass, this may come up later. This is an old story of an intelligent donkey. You might call it a smart ass. So intelligent that it can recognize logically that there's no relevant difference between the two bales of hay, that it is equidistant between, and therefore cannot come to a conclusion logically which one to choose. And Aristotle tells us this dumbass would die in the midst of plenty. That's not the language Aristotle uses, but you get the sense. That's not reasonable. That's too much rationality without any motivation. Real quick, yeah.
So, just real quick, when you mentioned artificial intelligence without emotion, so Ava from Ex Machina, she's
Yes?
programmed to have emotion. Would that be reasonable?
It depends. There were other problems with Ava that were separate. The point I would talk about is a guy named Hubert Dreyfus, a phenomenologist, philosopher from the 1970s. He just recently died. He argued that good old-fashioned artificial intelligence isn't going to work. Your computer that's just sitting there feeding it information, logical if-then hypotheticals isn't going to give you artificial intelligence. It's not going to be intelligent. You need emotion as part of that. And we'll talk more about that when we get into the distinction between appeals to emotion and fallacious appeal to emotion versus acceptable appeals to emotion. Okay, so applying common sense to a problem, even though it might not be the violation of a rule of logic, or committing a fallacy. I get a couple things I need to add here. An appeal to scare tactic, as opposed to argument, to get your kids to eat their damn food. This is actually not terribly unreasonable, right? I tell my kids, you need to eat or you're going to die. It's actually true, but it is a scare tactic, and in some cases it does work. But it's not obvious that rational and reasonable mean the same thing. What do we mean by rational then? Or what do we mean by irrational? If I believe something that's obviously false, and I could and therefore should know that it is false, that's an irrational belief. In fact, we should speak of the belief being irrational, not me or you being irrational. Don't say, you're being irrational. That just pisses people off. Your belief, I think, is not rational. They may interpret it the same way, but it's certainly more accurate to say, I think, that it isn't rational to believe this or that. If I take A to be the case, but also not A at the same time, that is not rational. If I fail to believe something that's obviously true, and I could know it as such, or I should, that is also irrational. And acting contrary to one's ends or one's own benefit, that's irrational. If I vote for a politician whose policies actually harm me, but I voted for them because they're so tall and handsome or whatever, that's irrational. Those are just some senses of that term, which again, we will return to, I think I mentioned like week 8. Oh, let me go through this quick joke to give you the sense of that. A minister, a priest, and a rabbi were out hiking. It was very hot and they were tired. When they came upon a small lake, knowing it was fairly secluded, they decided to go skinny dipping, as any minister, priest, and rabbi would. They swam for a few minutes, and then, feeling refreshed, they decided to pick up a few berries while enjoying their freedom. As they were crossing an open area, still naked, who should come along but a group of women from town? As they ran back into the wooded area, a minister and the priest covered their privates, while the rabbi covered his face. So get an image of that, just not detailed. As they were putting on their clothes, the minister and the priest asked the rabbi why he had covered his face instead of his privates. The rabbi replied, I don't know about you, but in my congregation, it's my face that they would recognize. I think that's quite brilliant. Well, I mean, given the situation, that's a pretty quick thinking move. And it seems absurd, but the context there is essential. And there's the humor again. We may go a minute or two over if that's okay, just a little bit, because I want to finish this up. The humor here can tell us that something has gone wrong, but we reinterpret it, and it makes sense to us, right? There's a joke about this. The unfaithful artist heard his wife coming up the stairs, and he said to his lover, quick, take off your clothes. That doesn't make sense until we reinterpret it. Oh, he's an artist. He could just be painting her nude. And it's quick thinking. And it's funny. One of the takeaways from the reading from Caps and Caps, our beliefs guide our actions, and if our beliefs are faulty, then our actions are likely to be faulty as well. If we act on false or unsupported beliefs, then our actions are less likely to achieve their goals. We talked about that before. If our beliefs are inaccurate, if they're unjustified, we may act upon them in ways that harm other people, including ourselves. And so it's not just logical, it is ethical as well. We'll end with this one. A wife tells her husband, I think the baby is coming. We've got to get to the hospital. There's no time to lose. Her husband leaps to his feet and shouts to his wife, rush hour is going to be so heavy. Let's take both cars so at least one of us will get there on time. This is a fallacy. It's an error in reasoning. It's called the fallacy of accident. And that is where we will finish up next time. This is our first fallacy of accident, the first error in reasoning. We will start with that next time. And to remind you, here's the stuff I'll talk about, but, oh yeah, I'm not going to talk about all that, but where is it? Your homework. Wow, I had a lot left. How did I end up talking so much? Read Lakoff and Johnson's Metaphors We Live By, just 1 through 8. If you have time, read the whole thing. Same thing with Rooney, just those pages. And do all of those things. Eat, watch comedy, walk on the beach, which is, yep, that's the right direction. Sleep and dream of logic, and then you can wake and do some more logic. All right?
Thank you.
Have a good weekend. And did I get everyone? Anyone come in late? Please come see me.